Montana Territory, 1872. The wind carried the scent of pine and promise across the rolling grasslands where Dawson Parker stood at the edge of his newly acquired ranch. At 26, he'd already seen enough heartbreak to last several lifetimes. The silver badge he'd once worn as a deputy in Colorado now lay buried in a wooden box beneath his bunk, along with the wedding ring he never got to place on Elizabeth's finger before the fever took her 2 years ago. No use dwelling on ghosts, he muttered to himself, adjusting his worn Stetson. The sun cast long shadows across the land he'd purchased with every cent saved from years of driving cattle and brief stints enforcing the law. 15 acres, a modest cabin, and enough distance from everyone to ensure he'd never have to feel that kind of pain again. Dawson firmly believed that the frontier was no place for tender feelings. Out here, a man survived by staying vigilant, independent, and closed off. Connections meant vulnerability, and vulnerability got folks killed in these untamed territories. His ranch would be his redemption, proof that he needed nothing and no one. As he watched his small herd of cattle grazing in the distance, Dawson took pride in the solitary life he'd carved out. Yet sometimes, in the quiet evenings when the campfire dwindled to embers, an emptiness crept in that no amount of land or livestock could fill. Just need to finish that north fence before winter, he reminded himself, silencing the unwelcome longing. He had plans and purpose. That was enough for any man. The following morning, Dawson rode into Silver Creek, the nearest town, a modest collection of wooden buildings serving the surrounding homesteaders and passing travelers. The general store's bell jangled as he entered, nodding curtly to old Mr. Whitaker behind the counter. "Morning, Parker. Your fence posts came in yesterday," the shopkeeper said. "Too heavy for delivery. You'll need to haul them yourself." "Appreciate the notice," Dawson replied, already calculating how many trips it would take with his wagon. The door chimed again, and Dawson instinctively stepped aside without looking up, focused on his list of supplies. It wasn't until he heard a soft gasp followed by the clatter of something falling that he turned. A young woman knelt on the floor, gathering scattered papers. Her honey-blonde hair escaped from a practical bun, framing a face that stopped Dawson's thoughts mid-stride. She wore a simple blue dress, practical yet somehow more elegant than the frontier typically permitted. "Let me help you, ma'am," he said, crouching beside her before he could think better of it. "Thank you," she answered, her voice carrying an Eastern refinement. When she looked up, eyes the color of summer sky met his, and something inside Dawson's carefully constructed fortress wavered. "Ah, Miss Cooper," Mr. Whitaker called out. "I see you've met our local rancher, Dawson Parker." "Dawson, this is Lillian Cooper, our new schoolteacher. Arrived on yesterday's stage from Boston." Lillian Cooper, 22 years old and brimming with determination, offered her hand. "Pleased to meet you, Mr. Parker." When their hands touched, Dawson felt something he hadn't experienced since before Elizabeth's passing. A simple human connection that somehow frightened him more than facing down armed bandits. "Likewise, Miss Cooper," he managed, quickly releasing her hand. "Welcome to Silver Creek. I was just asking Mr. Whitaker about securing transportation to the schoolhouse. Apparently, it's some distance outside town." Whitaker nodded enthusiastically. 5 miles west, near the creek crossing. Been empty since last winter when Mrs. Henderson returned east. Dawson saw the flash of concern in Lillian's eyes. 5 miles was no small distance for a city woman unaccustomed to frontier travel. "I'm headed that direction," Dawson heard himself saying, though his ranch lay in the opposite direction. "I could take you there after I load my supplies." The smile that brightened her face made something in his chest twist uncomfortably. "That would be most kind, Mr. Parker." An hour later, they sat side by side on his wagon, Lillian holding tightly to the seat as the rough trail jostled them. Her trunks and teaching materials were secured in the back alongside Dawson's supplies. "I understand the schoolhouse has attached living quarters?" Dawson asked, breaking the silence. "Yes, though Mr. Whitaker warned they may need considerable attention after sitting empty." She adjusted her bonnet against the sun. "I'm prepared for frontier living, Mr. Parker. I may have been raised in Boston, but I didn't come west expecting luxury." "What did you expect, then?" he asked, genuinely curious what would drive a refined Eastern woman to the Montana Territory. Lillian gazed at the sweeping landscape. Space. Purpose. The chance to build something meaningful. She turned those clear blue eyes toward him. What about you? Were you born out here? Kentucky originally. Came west after the war. He offered nothing more, and she seemed to respect his reticence. As they approached the schoolhouse, a simple clapboard building standing alone against the Montana sky, Dawson felt an unexpected reluctance to complete their journey. Something about Lillian Cooper's presence had momentarily lightened the weight he carried. His discomfort increased when they discovered the schoolhouse door hanging from broken hinges, evidence of animals having taken shelter inside during the winter months. "Oh dear," Lillian said, surveying the dusty interior with its overturned desks and scattered debris. Dawson set her trunks down carefully. "This isn't right. You can't stay here tonight." "I'll manage," she insisted, though her confident facade had faltered. "No, ma'am," Dawson said firmly. "There's a homesteading family about a mile from here. The Andersons. They'd be happy to put you up until this place is habitable." Before she could protest further, a distant rumble of thunder punctuated his argument. Dark clouds were gathering on the western horizon. "That settles it," he said. "Storm's coming. We need to secure your belongings and get you to shelter." Working together, they moved her trunks inside and covered the broken windows as best they could. By the time they finished, fat raindrops were beginning to fall. "We won't make it to the Andersons before this hits full force," Dawson realized, watching the rapidly darkening sky. "My ranch is closer. You can wait out the storm there." Lightning split the sky as they raced the storm back to Dawson's property. The rain caught them just as the cabin came into view, and they were both soaked by the time they reached the porch. Inside his modest home, Dawson felt strangely self-conscious. It was a simple place. One main room with a stone fireplace, a small kitchen area, a table with 2 chairs, and a curtained-off sleeping space. Clean but Spartan, it reflected his solitary existence. "I'll get a fire going," he said, avoiding her eyes as she stood dripping on his plank floor. He rummaged through a trunk and produced a worn shirt and trousers. "They'll be big, but they're dry. You can change behind that curtain." As flames began to catch in the fireplace, Dawson kept his back turned, listening to the soft rustling of fabric. When Lillian emerged in his clothes, sleeves rolled up multiple times and trousers cinched with a length of rope, something shifted in his perception of his own home. It suddenly seemed emptier than before, despite her presence. "Thank you," she said simply, coming to stand by the fire. Her hair hung in damp waves around her shoulders, catching the firelight like threads of gold. They passed the hours of the storm in conversation that gradually became less stilted. Lillian spoke of her teaching in Boston, her widowed father's recent passing, and her decision to answer the advertisement for a frontier teacher. Dawson found himself sharing small details about his ranch and his hopes for expanding his herd, carefully avoiding any mention of his past or Elizabeth. When the rain finally subsided the next morning, Dawson felt oddly reluctant to return Lillian to the schoolhouse. Still, duty called. He drove her back, agreeing to return the following day to help with repairs. What began as a simple act of frontier courtesy became a daily ritual over the next 2 weeks. Dawson would finish his morning ranch chores, then ride to the schoolhouse where Lillian worked tirelessly to prepare for her students. Together, they mended broken windows, repaired furniture, and cleaned away months of neglect. During their work, Lillian shared her vision for the school, not just reading and arithmetic, but literature, history, and the sciences. Her enthusiasm challenged Dawson's cynical outlook. Each day, he found himself lingering longer, inventing new repairs that needed attention. "The first families arrive tomorrow for the term," Lillian mentioned one afternoon as they hung new curtains she'd sewn from fabric ordered from the general store. 6 children to start, but Mr. Whitaker says more families are settling nearby. "The Anderson children will keep you busy enough," Dawson replied with a rare smile. "Especially young Timothy." "You're good with children," Lillian observed. "I've noticed how you speak to them in town." Dawson's smile faded. "Just being neighborly." That evening, riding back to his empty ranch, Dawson confronted an uncomfortable truth. Lillian Cooper had begun to breach the walls he'd built around himself. Her determination, her kindness, her unwavering optimism in the face of frontier challenges, all reminded him of qualities he'd once admired in Elizabeth. The comparison brought both comfort and terror. "This isn't Boston," he reminded himself harshly. "Out here, hope is a luxury that gets you killed." Yet his protests rang increasingly hollow. The following week, Silver Creek buzzed with news of a small band of outlaws operating in the territory. They'd robbed 2 stagecoaches and a homestead to the north. Sheriff Mills called a town meeting to organize increased vigilance. "We've got women and children to think about," the sheriff emphasized, his gaze lingering on Lillian, who sat primly among the townspeople, especially those living outside town limits. Dawson felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. The schoolhouse stood isolated, an easy target. "Miss Cooper shouldn't stay alone at the schoolhouse until these men are captured," he found himself saying, drawing surprised glances from the assembled townspeople. "I can't abandon my students," Lillian protested. "No one's suggesting that," Dawson replied. "But perhaps arrangements could be made for you to stay with a family in town and ride out daily." The meeting ended with Sheriff Mills organizing patrol schedules. Despite his determination to remain uninvolved in town affairs, Dawson volunteered for the route that included the schoolhouse. That night, riding back to his ranch under a canopy of stars, Dawson admitted to himself that his concern went beyond simple frontier courtesy. The thought of harm coming to Lillian Cooper had awakened protective instincts he'd thought long buried. Life developed a new rhythm. Dawson would complete his ranch work by mid-afternoon, then ride patrol past the schoolhouse before Lillian departed for her lodgings in town. Often, he'd find himself timing his arrival to coincide with the end of her school day, offering to escort her back to Silver Creek. During these rides, something unexpected blossomed. Their conversations deepened beyond pleasantries, revealing shared passions for literature and music. Lillian confessed her childhood dream of becoming a concert pianist before practical considerations led her to teaching. Dawson cautiously shared memories of his Kentucky childhood, his mother's love of poetry, his father's craftsman hands. "You never speak of the years between Kentucky and Montana," Lillian observed one October afternoon as golden light bathed the landscape. Dawson tensed, his hands tightening on the reins. "Not much worth telling." "I don't believe that," she said softly. "But I respect your privacy, Mr. Parker." "Dawson," he corrected, surprising himself. "After all these escorting rides, I think you've earned the right to use my given name." Her smile warmed something long cold within him. "Dawson, then, and you must call me Lillian." When they reached town, he tipped his hat in farewell, watching her walk toward her boarding house. For the first time in years, his ranch no longer seemed like sanctuary, but merely empty space awaiting his return. November brought early snow and the anticipation of Thanksgiving. The schoolchildren chattered excitedly about the upcoming community celebration planned at the church. Dawson had always avoided such gatherings, but found himself reconsidering when Lillian mentioned she'd be attending alone. "It would be my pleasure to escort you," he said, the words emerging before he could reconsider. The night of the gathering, Dawson arrived at her boarding house in his best shirt, his typically unruly dark hair carefully combed. When Lillian appeared in a forest green dress that complemented her honey blonde hair, now arranged with particular care, he momentarily forgot to breathe. "You look beautiful," he said simply. The celebration transformed the modest church. Lanterns cast a warm glow over long tables laden with food contributed by every family. Children darted between adults. Laughter mingled with music from a fiddle and harmonica, and for a few hours, the harsh realities of frontier life receded. Dawson found himself drawn into conversations, introduced as Miss Cooper's special friend. The designation both alarmed and pleased him. Later, when Lillian was pulled away to judge the children's recitations, Mrs. Anderson settled beside him. "Never thought I'd see the day Dawson Parker attended a social function," she remarked good-naturedly. "Our teacher must be special indeed." "She's dedicated to her students," he deflected. "And you're dedicated to her safety," Mrs. Anderson observed. "My Robert says you've ridden past that schoolhouse more in the past month than in the 2 years you've lived here." Before Dawson could respond, a commotion erupted near the church entrance. Sheriff Mills burst in, snow dusting his shoulders. "The Hanson homestead was hit," he announced grimly. "They're safe, but the outlaws took their horses and supplies. They're headed north, but we need men to join the pursuit." The celebration dissolved into urgent activity. Dawson moved immediately to join the posse forming outside. "Be careful," Lillian said, catching his arm as he donned his coat. Concern shadowed her eyes. "Please come back safely." The warmth of her touch lingered as he rode into the snowy night with 12 other men. The pursuit lasted 3 days through bitter cold. They recovered the stolen horses but lost the outlaws' trail at the territorial border. When they returned to Silver Creek, exhausted and frostbitten, Dawson learned that one of the captured horses had carried saddlebags containing wanted posters from Wyoming territory. "Look familiar?" Sheriff Mills asked, spreading the papers on his desk. Dawson's blood froze. Among the faces was his own, younger and sporting a full beard, but unmistakable. The name beneath read, Daniel Peterson, with the charges. Wanted for association with the Coulter Gang, 1868. "This isn't you," the sheriff stated rather than asked, his eyes shrewd. "Though the resemblance is striking." Dawson swallowed hard. "My brother," he lied. "Been running from his shadow for years." Sheriff Mills studied him for a long moment before gathering the posters. "Family can be complicated. Suppose that's why a man might change his name, start fresh." He locked the posters in his desk drawer. Fortunate that no one else noticed the resemblance. Relief warred with renewed panic as Dawson left the sheriff's office. His past, so carefully buried, threatened to surface. If the town, if Lillian, discovered his former association with outlaws, everything would unravel. For a week, Dawson avoided Silver Creek and the schoolhouse, throwing himself into ranch work until exhaustion granted him dreamless sleep. But on the 8th day, a familiar figure appeared on the horizon. Lillian, bundled against the December cold, approached on a borrowed horse. "I thought perhaps you were ill," she said without preamble when she reached his porch. "The children have missed your visits." "Been busy," he replied tersely. "Winter preparations." Lillian's eyes, so perceptive, saw through his facade. "What happened during that pursuit, Dawson? You've been different since you returned." "Nothing happened," he insisted. "I just realized some things need to remain as they are." "And what things are those?" she challenged, dismounting with a grace that belied her Eastern origins. "This," he gestured between them. "Whatever's developing between us. It's not wise." Hurt flashed across her face before determination replaced it. "I see. And did you reach this conclusion alone, or do I have some say in the matter?" "It's not that simple," he said, running a hand through his hair. "You don't know everything about me." "I know enough," she replied. "I know you're kind, though you hide it. I know you're honorable, though something haunts you. I know when you think no one is watching, you look at me as if I might disappear if you blink." Her words stripped away his defenses. For a moment, Dawson almost confessed everything. His real identity, his brief, unwitting association with the Coulter Gang before he realized they were outlaws, his escape and reinvention, Elizabeth's death from fever before they could marry. The weight of secrets pressed against his chest. Instead, he merely said, "The frontier breaks everything eventually, Lillian. Better to end things before they truly begin." "Coward," she whispered, the word cutting deeper than any bullet. "The frontier doesn't break everything. It only breaks those too afraid to build something strong enough to withstand it." She mounted her horse and rode away, leaving Dawson alone with the truth of her accusation. Christmas approached, bringing festive preparations to Silver Creek despite the bitter cold. The school term ended with a pageant that Dawson couldn't bring himself to attend. Instead, he stood at his cabin window, watching snow blanket his land in silence, wondering how solitude had transformed from sanctuary to prison. 2 days before Christmas, a pounding at his door roused Dawson from fitful sleep. Mr. Anderson stood on his porch, face grim beneath his frost-covered hat. "Outlaws," the man gasped. "At the schoolhouse. Miss Cooper's there, preparing for the children's Christmas program. My boy saw men approaching on horseback and ran for help." Cold dread washed through Dawson as he grabbed his rifle and gun belt. "How many?" "3, Timothy said. Sheriff's gathering men in town, but you're closer." Dawson didn't wait to hear more, saddling his fastest horse and galloping through the pre-dawn darkness. Snow had stopped falling, leaving a pristine white landscape under a sky beginning to lighten with approaching dawn. The schoolhouse windows glowed with lantern light as Dawson approached cautiously. 3 horses stood hitched outside. He secured his own mount in a stand of trees and moved silently toward the building, years of frontier instinct guiding his steps. Through a window, he glimpsed Lillian standing defiant before 3 rough-looking men. Even from this distance, he recognized the leader, Jack Coulter himself, the man whose gang Dawson had briefly ridden with before discovering their true nature. "Don't care about your supplies," Lillian was saying, her voice remarkably steady. "But these decorations and gifts are for the children. Surely even men like you wouldn't steal from children at Christmas." Coulter laughed, a sound that had once chilled Dawson's blood years ago in Wyoming. "Lady, we'll take whatever we please. Food, decorations, and maybe a pretty schoolteacher to keep us company for a while." Dawson's vision narrowed to a pinpoint of rage. Moving to the door, he leveled his rifle and kicked it open. "Step away from her, Jack." The outlaws whirled, hands dropping to weapons. Coulter's eyes widened in recognition. "Well, if it ain't Daniel Peterson. Heard you was dead." "Daniel Peterson died in Wyoming," Dawson replied coldly. "Now step back from Miss Cooper." Lillian's shocked gaze darted between them. "You know these men?" "Knows us." Coulter laughed again. "He rode with us until he got squeamish and ran out after that bank job in Cheyenne." "The job you never told me about until we were already there," Dawson clarified, his rifle unwavering. "The job where you shot that guard who wasn't even armed." Understanding dawned in Lillian's eyes, but he couldn't bear to look directly at her. Whatever trust had existed between them was surely shattered now. "3 against 1, Daniel," Coulter drawled. "Those ain't odds I'd bet on." "Then it's fortunate he's not alone," came Sheriff Mills' voice from behind Dawson as he and 4 armed townsmen appeared in the doorway. "Weapons down, gentlemen." What followed was a brief but violent confrontation. One outlaw surrendered immediately. Another drew and was wounded by the sheriff's deputy. Coulter, recognizing defeat, seemed to yield before suddenly lunging toward Lillian with a knife. Dawson fired without hesitation. Coulter fell, the knife clattering harmlessly to the floor. In the ringing silence that followed, Dawson finally met Lillian's gaze, finding not condemnation but shock and something else he couldn't identify. "Are you hurt?" he asked her. She shook her head mutely. In the aftermath, as the wounded were tended and prisoners secured, Sheriff Mills pulled Dawson aside. "Seems I was right about that wanted poster," he said quietly. "Though it wasn't your brother, was it?" "No," Dawson admitted. "I rode with them briefly, not knowing what they were. Left as soon as I discovered the truth, but the posters didn't make that distinction." The sheriff nodded thoughtfully. "Man's judged by the company he keeps, but also by the company he chooses to leave." He glanced toward Lillian, who sat wrapped in a blanket, answering questions from a deputy. Some things might need explaining, though. The townspeople's reactions varied from suspicion to cautious acceptance once Sheriff Mills vouched for Dawson's character. But Lillian remained distant, her responses polite but reserved when he approached her after the prisoners were taken to town. "I should have told you," he said simply. "I was afraid of what you'd think." "Yes, you should have," she agreed, her voice tired. "Fear seems to govern many of your decisions, Dawson. Or should I call you Daniel?" "Dawson is who I am now," he insisted. "Daniel Peterson died years ago, along with the foolish young man who fell in with the wrong crowd." She studied him with those clear blue eyes that seemed to see straight through his defenses. "I need time to think," she finally said. "This is a considerable revelation." Christmas came and went without further communication. Dawson spent the day alone at his ranch, turning down invitations from neighbors who, despite knowing fragments of his past now, still extended holiday goodwill. The revelation of his history had paradoxically increased rather than decreased his connections to the community. Where he had expected rejection, he found mostly acceptance, yet the only acceptance that truly mattered remained uncertain. New Year's Day dawned clear and cold. Dawson rode to the overlook above his property, surveying the land that had been both refuge and prison. For the first time, he allowed himself to imagine a different future, one with laughter filling his cabin, children running across the fields, and Lillian by his side. The sound of approaching hoofbeats startled him from his reverie. Turning, he saw Lillian guiding her borrowed horse up the slope. She wore a blue woolen coat, her honey-blonde hair streaming behind her in the winter wind. "I hoped I might find you here," she said, dismounting. "Mr. Anderson mentioned you often ride to this spot. It offers the best view of the ranch," Dawson replied, his heart hammering. "And beyond." They stood in silence for a moment, watching their breath form clouds in the frigid air. "I've had time to think," Lillian finally said. "About your past, about who you were and who you are now." "And?" he asked, scarcely breathing. And I've concluded that we all carry histories we're not proud of. The measure of a person isn't in their mistakes, but in how they remedy them. She turned to face him directly. You could have fled when those outlaws appeared. Instead, you faced your past to protect me and the children's future. Hope, dangerous and fragile, unfurled in Dawson's chest. I was terrified they would harm you. Because you care for me? She asked softly. Because I love you, he answered, the truth breaking free after months of restraint. I tried not to. I told myself the frontier was no place for such feelings, that I didn't deserve them after Elizabeth, after everything. But loving you isn't something I can control, Lillian. She stepped closer, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Then perhaps you should stop trying to control it. When her hand touched his cheek, Dawson felt the last of his defenses crumble. I can't offer you Boston. Just a ranch that needs work, a life that will never be easy, and a man who's still learning how to be worthy of someone like you. I didn't come west looking for easy, Lillian replied, her smile illuminating the winter day. I came looking for purpose and meaning. I found both, and something I wasn't looking for at all, love. Their first kiss, there on the overlook with Montana spread before them, sealed a promise that neither had expected to make again. The frontier hadn't taken everything after all. Instead, it had given them each other. Spring brought renewal to the land and to Dawson's life. The schoolhouse rang with children's laughter, and his ranch flourished with improvements made by newly eager hands. The cabin expanded room by room as Dawson worked weekends and evenings, preparing for a different future than the solitary one he'd once envisioned. On a perfect June day in 1873, with wildflowers carpeting the meadows and the distant mountains still crowned with snow, Dawson Parker and Lillian Cooper were married beneath an arch of fresh-cut pine at the entrance to their ranch. The entire community of Silver Creek gathered to witness their vows, a testament to the connections that had grown in place of isolation. I promise to face whatever comes with you, Dawson said, holding Lillian's hands in his as the setting sun painted the world in gold. To build rather than withdraw, to trust rather than fear, and to love you through all the seasons of our life together. Lillian's eyes shimmered with joyful tears as she responded, and I promise to stand beside you in all weather, to believe in the man you are now and the family we'll become, and to remind you, whenever you forget, that love doesn't make the frontier weaker, it makes it worth fighting for. As they sealed their vows with a kiss, cheers erupted from their assembled friends and neighbors. The celebration continued long into the evening, with dancing and feasting beneath lantern light. When the last guest departed, Dawson led his bride to their home, no longer a solitary cabin, but the beginning of a legacy they would build together. Later, as they stood on their porch watching stars appear in the vastness above Montana, Lillian leaned against her husband's shoulder. "What are you thinking?" she asked. Dawson smiled, drawing her closer. "That I was wrong about the frontier. It's not a place where love can't survive. It's a place where love is most necessary." He pressed a kiss to her forehead, and that when two hearts truly meet, even the most guarded soul can learn to love again. In the years that followed, the Parker Ranch grew alongside their family. Children's laughter echoed across the fields where Dawson had once sought only silence. The schoolhouse flourished under Lillian's continued guidance, even as she balanced teaching with motherhood. Together, they weathered droughts and blizzards, celebrations and sorrows, proving that on the frontier, two hearts united could withstand whatever challenges arose. The false belief that had once governed Dawson's life, that the frontier demanded isolation and emotional fortification, gave way to a deeper truth, that in the wildest places, in the harshest circumstances, love wasn't weakness but the greatest strength of all.